Hello, our topic is Ceres. Ceres is classified as a dwarf planet. It's one of the larger objects in the asteroid belt. Well, it is the largest object in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Between Mars and Jupiter, there are thousands of these rocks, we can call them, and the largest of them is Ceres, and it's called a dwarf planet because it has some characteristics similar to planets. We won't go into all those little astronomical details. What we want to focus on is what is the astrological significance of Ceres, and it's very clear. Our research over and over again is strikingly clear. And you might say this is even a little, it's exciting, but even a little disturbing, because a lot of us say, oh, we would like to keep astrology simple. Well, I would love to keep it simple. And people are throwing in all these additional objects. But wow, if they work, they work. We have to let the astrology tell us, let the research tell us. And over again, the consistency of Ceres is amazing. So the impact of Ceres from our research, where we go through a database, look at the people who have Ceres conspicuous, and see what's going on. It's really amazing. And in 2020, my wife Faye did some research. I worked with her on it. She presented the findings from looking at people who have Sun conjunct Ceres. So before that, I already did a number of other studies. In fact, we have 3 videos for members only on Ceres from the previous research. Did another study, with done in a different way. This time we're looking at Ceres just conjunct the Sun, and 3 people come up as the strongest, and the themes are just amazingly consistent. So wow, we really are very confident about what Ceres means. And what does it mean? It means, okay, next slide. It means a broad Ceres, I'm just going to read this right off the slide. Ceres brings a broad philosophical and sometimes economic or religious perspective on personal issues. And by the way, not necessarily in a healthy and positive way. So one way that I put this is, what Ceres does is it intrudes Jupiter on our personal lives. Okay? Because Ceres is between Mars and Jupiter, and it's creating a kind of integration between Mars and Jupiter. It's bringing Jupiter, and in essence, outer planets in general, things farther out, more at a social level, more at a collective level, into our immediate personal level. By personal level, I mean, our bodies, we can decide what we're doing moment by moment through the day. Am I going to go out for lunch? Blah, blah, blah. Am I going to do this? Am I going to get some exercise today? Etc. So and our personal decisions, our friendships we make, and especially the extremely important personal decisions, things like marriage, social. What Ceres does is it brings a philosophical perspective on our personal lives. Like, how do we provide for the next generation? How do we bring up children? Well, children are born from sexual relationships between men and women. And how are men and women going to structure their relationship to bring up the children? Brings up the idea of family, organization. What are the ethics, rules, boundaries, guidelines, aspirations? It brings up questions about what the point of life is. So in our personal decisions, it's in a larger social context. That's what Ceres does. One of the ideas about Ceres that's been around for a long time is it's the great mother. Ceres, the harvest and agricultural and food, and that it's nurturing and supportive. All these positive images also goes along with the idea of the asteroids being, some people call them the asteroid goddesses, bringing in this feminine, nurturing, supportive energy. Well, to kind of balance the other planets. Well, in vibrational astrology, we don't see the planets as so gender related. It's not like Venus is so feminine and Mars is so masculine. Everything is just serving a purpose, a function, trying to get somewhere. And it does that in all people. So it ends up that Ceres is not, it's actually not all about being nurturing and supportive. It's about what are your social guidelines for things like marriage, nourishment, food, support, shelter, all these things. And it's so consistent. So in the research that Faye and I did, and Faye did the bulk of the work, I kind of just helped along with this. The people who stood out, who had Sun conjunct Ceres with the smallest orb, are three people: Richard P. Howell, Joseph Henderson, Paul Bourget. And again, it confirms what we found before. And here's the story of Richard Powell. He's a prolific writer. He writes, well, let me show you his chart first. Here's his chart. So born on November 28th, 1908, 2:43 a.m. These are people with AA data from a birth certificate of birth record, and there is Sun conjunct Ceres with a 1-minute orb. Now the idea is that if you have Sun conjunct Ceres with a 1-minute orb, you can go up to the 64 vibration. That orb becomes about 64 times larger. They're still conjunct. So, with about a 1-degree orb. So you can go up to high and higher vibrations, and that conjunction is still there. So when there's a very, very tight conjunction in the birth chart, we all know in astrology that that's very important. In vibrational astrology, we consider it extraordinarily important, like massively important, because it's so fundamental, pervades so many things. So the series should be evident. It should be clear in some way. How is it clear in the life of Richard Powell? Okay, so he's a prolific writer. Two of his most well-known books, one is called The Philadelphian, the other is called Pioneer Go Home, both of which were made into successful Hollywood movies. So these books are popular, they got a lot of attention, turned into movies in the United States and Hollywood. And they both portray themes of the effect of the social environment on families. OMG, you can't make this stuff up. This is amazing. His two biggest books turned into movies have the same theme of the effect of the social environment on families. The story of Ceres. What we're finding by doing this controlled research, where we're not cherry picking people, he's the number one Ceres person out of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. He's number one. That's what he's known for, writing about Ceres. I mean, it's really unbelievable. So in his book, Pioneer Go Home, I'll tell you a little story about it. It's about a family in New Jersey. This is all fiction. He calls them the Quimpers. And they moved to Columbiana, a fictional state. It resembles Florida. They moved to Columbiana. And they squat on the side of a highway where a new bridge is being built, outraging local officials. So they're going to Columbiana, and they just decide to park their vehicle under this bridge. And of course, the local officials are upset about this. And it was later adapted into a play by Herman Roscher, and also an Elvis Presley film, Follow That Dream. So the Quimper clan consists of Pop Quimper, who has lived his entire life off government welfare programs, such as unemployment compensation and aid to families with dependent children. Wow, this is Ceres. Ceres is about what do we do when people are in poverty, when they don't have enough food. What do we have? Social programs. That's what we've collectively decided to do. And Ceres is not this sweet, gentle, always giving. We haven't seen that at all. It's about making tough decisions about how are we going to do this? What's our priority? It's very philosophical. How do we deal with this? And so Pop Quimper learns of old homesteading statutes in the state and determines that he has a legal right to occupy the land. Another Ceres theme. When there's land, people own the land. Now that's an interesting concept, that we own the land. We have the natural resources. A lot of what Ceres is about is, here's the natural state. Here's another way to think of Ceres. What's the natural state? Natural state is we have bodies like animals that need to be fed, and in the case of humans, we need clothing, we need shelter, we need food, we need productivity, we have sexual desires, etc. There's land, and then socially we decide what to do about it. And we have this concept of owning land, and we have laws regarding that are handed down. And sometimes it gets complicated. The interaction of the social system, the laws, the ideals, the regulations, how they're affecting our personal lives. And he finds this statute saying he has a legal right to occupy the land, almost poking fun at Ceres, like the struggles we go through, the issues that come up in the interface of the social regulation, the social context of our lives, how we divide up nature, land, so that people can utilize it, and the different laws. That and the conflicts and the problems that arise, that's the heart of Ceres, and that's what his book is about. In his other very, very popular book, now he's very prolific, but these are two books that were among the most popular. A bride finds out that her husband cannot consummate the marriage, but not sure if it is because he is homosexual, impotent, or for some other reason. Oh my God, Ceres. We have ways to deal with sexuality, and one of those is the concept of marriage. And again, what Ceres often likes to do is it asks the question, are our social conventions working? Are we meeting these fundamental needs? How does it end up? We have this idea of marriage, but you end up marrying somebody who cannot consummate the marriage, and there's all these possible reasons. And the fact is, some people are impotent, some are homosexual, but we have this idea of marriage, which most often, especially when this book was written, was, heterosexual. Now things have changed. That's also a Ceres issue. How our social regulations adapt, change, evolve. Okay, so she later has a son who meets a wealthy socialite who is expected to marry another wealthy person. Another aspect of this whole marriage and how we meet our needs. Marriage meeting certain needs of sexuality, romance, companionship, raising families, closeness, commitment, all these things, building this solid social structure to support civilization. But it gets complex. People marry for money. They have expectations of who you will marry, who's socially appropriate. Ceres. All of these are Ceres issues. How the social context influences our personal life. So Ceres themes of how social expectations and social customs affect sex and other basic needs, and including the importance of how we even develop our civilization. How do we raise children and have a strong society? So that's the heart of Ceres, and that's what his books are completely about. This research suggests that Ceres has a very powerful fundamental importance. And this makes our astrology, unfortunately, more complicated. Not only do we have the Sun, Moon, Mercury, blah, blah, but these other objects are really working. We're just looking at the research. I mean, as researchers, as in astrology, we don't care whether something works. We don't have an a priori preference. Let's just find out. And over and over, this is just the latest in a series of studies that was done. It was done back in 2020. We decide sometimes after 3, 4, 5 years, we'll share some of the stuff that came out in the conference. So those of you who go to the Vibrational Astrology Conference, this is the kind of exciting stuff. You get the latest, most exciting recent things. So those of you who are at the 2020 conference or ordered the videos, you know about this already. There's so much information, so many developments. It's good to go over it again. I can't even remember all of the subtleties and nuances of the discoveries. But come to the conference, the annual conference, and you get the up-to-date action. You meet the astrologers, etc. Okay, now, second person, a fellow named Joseph Henderson. They called him Mr. Piano. Obviously played the piano. Very accomplished pianist. He was a composer also. He played piano and also was very involved in arranging the music of pop star singer Petula Clark. If you're as old as I am, you might know Petula Clark back, what was that, the 70s or so. She was a very popular singer, and he arranged music for her. Now, what we're seeing with Ceres is sometimes they're involved directly in things of, related to social care and like welfare, things like that. But usually not. Usually it's influencing whatever they're doing, their behavior, what they have to say, what they contribute. It's almost very philosophical and thoughtful about how to deal with this interface of personal needs and how what our social regulations are for it, our social expectations. So there he is, also a Sun conjunct Ceres 1 minute orb. If you were to measure it down to the seconds of arc, it was very, very slightly larger orb than the previous fellow. So he came in number 2, almost exactly the same orb. Again, it should pervade his life. And one of the things we find out with him is that he had he ended up having a romantic relationship with Petula Clark. He was arranging songs for her, and we don't know very much about this guy. We have very little information. But one of the things, at least I couldn't find very much information about him. But one of the things is they had a romantic relationship. Just to read from this website at allmusic.com, I give the exact website address. I'll read the quote. Clark and Henderson later had a romantic relationship, which is said to have broken up because he did not want to be Mr. Petula Clark. Okay, so she's a star. Even I know her name. Lots of people know her name. And at the time, millions more knew her name. Very, very extreme, celebrity. Well, would you marry a celebrity? I mean, would you? I mean, here's the thing about it. It changes the context of your life. You now are the marriage partner to a celebrity. It's part of your definition as a social being. It's part of your place in life. Now, I tend to be, I guess, a romantic, and I think, well, if I'm in love with somebody, I don't care if they're a celebrity or not. But maybe I don't have strong Ceres. Maybe I'm not thinking, or the way that my Ceres operates, it doesn't affect me in that way. Actually, I do have a strong Ceres, but my way of thinking of it is comes to a different conclusion. But it's that social impact. I don't have Sun conjunct Ceres with a 1 minute orb like this fellow, Joseph Henderson. And he's thinking, okay, I get married and I'm going to be Mr. Petula Clark. If you marry someone with a strong Ceres, I have here at the last sentence, do not underestimate the social context. There's a lesson for you. So the social context is very important to Ceres people. If you're marrying somebody you have bought into, you've subscribed to, you've endorsed, you are now participating in a social construct, a social concept of marriage. Ceres is more consciously aware of this than other people, that this is the way we've decided to live. And what are the consequences? What are the tax consequences? What are the financial consequences? What are the, what does it do to your other relationships? Obviously, it has a huge impact on that. Changes the whole context and fabric of your life, and you have entered into a social contract. That's really what I'm getting at. The marriage is not just me and you, we're so in love. It's a social contract with social consequences. And the way it fits into the social world is very front and center for Ceres. Very front and center. So with a Ceres like that, you marry somebody with an extremely strong Ceres like Joseph Henderson, you've got to be thinking about how that person sees the marriage as a social contract, as affecting their place in the world, because it does. Obviously it does, big time. They're thinking as much about that as they're thinking about me and you. How am I now placed in the world? Well, now, you marry Petula Clark, you're, secondary. You happen to be the spouse of that person. He doesn't want that context. Ceres has very strong, here's another point about Ceres, it tends to have strong ideas. It tends to come to conclusions. It thinks about whether marriage works, whether social welfare works, as in those books by the first fellow, what was his name? Richard Powell. He goes through the details of what happens, what are the results, what are the consequences. Ceres comes to decisions. It's saying, here's the social context, which one is best? What are the trade-offs? And usually it sees trade-offs. Ceres tends not to come to an arbitrary, strong philosophical agreement. It's looking at the facts, looking at how things work out, and it sees the complexity of it, and it usually comes to a conclusion. Now here's Paul Bourget, the third of the top 3 super Ceres people in this research. Ceres conjunct the sun. It's one way to do it. We do the research in different ways so that we can see it from different perspectives, but always no cherry picking of the data. These are the 3 people. We must interpret their charts. We must make sense out of it. And that constraint of not being able to pick the charts changes everything. It moves astrology from being a arbitrary, personal, anecdotal evidence to being a data-driven, evidence-based practice. That's how dramatic the difference is. And when you constrain yourself to look at what the data is telling you, it can be quite a shock because the subtle ways in which we bend things and ignore things becomes obvious, and new insights come out. And we also apply it in our personal practice and personal observations as well. We need both. Now, anyway, going back to Paul Bourget, he happened to be a writer also. He wrote novels. I don't think Ceres is, inclined to being a writer per se. It is one avenue that fits pretty well because you get to share your point of view on the interaction of social systems with people's personal lives. So it can be good, but it's not specifically writing. Anyway, he wrote novels, many of which emphasized his religious, philosophical, and ethical beliefs about marriage. This is amazing. Another of the top 3 people with Sun conjunct Ceres talking about the philosophical, in this case also religious and ethical issues surrounding marriage. Extraordinarily similar to Richard P. Powell. Bourget pushes a stronger point of view than Powell, but both write about the social, political, and philosophical context of marriage. So Bourget has some very clear and definitive ideas. Here's a quote. Those men and women who follow the teachings of the Church are in great measure protected from the moral disasters which almost invariably follow when men and women allow themselves to be guided and swayed by their senses, passions, and weaknesses. Wow. I say wow because this is Ceres. I put here in this in the white text, Ceres, the intrusion of Jupiter in our personal lives. The social context, how marriage, which meets many personal needs, sexuality, intimacy, the desire for children, the desire to be stable and constructive in life, even the desire for commitment, the desire for teamwork, so many, many needs fulfilled in marriage. Marriage can also be a kind of religious devotion to a person that you honor. I mean, many, many things come into play here to meet our needs, our way of living. And it's a social construct. It's a socially ordained way of life that most cultures support. And he's saying how good it is and what it does for us. And specifically, how marriage lifts us out of the limitations, the greed, the personal emphasis, and places that in a larger context. And that's good. Now, you may agree, you may disagree, you may have whatever feelings you have about what Bourget is saying, that we are not so interested in terms of learning the astrology. What we're interested in is that he thinks about this, and it's fundamental, and it's one of his primary interests in life. Wow. I mean, those men and women who follow the teachings of the church are in great measure protected from the moral disasters which almost invariably follow, and men and women allow themselves to be guided and swayed by their senses, passions, and weaknesses. Ceres. And very often, Ceres will take the side of Jupiter, of the social context, that cannot be ignored. It's bringing that into our personal lives, emphasizing how that's relevant, important, and even uplifts and exalts your personal life by expanding it and elevating it, by being aware. So this is his way of understanding what he's concluded. I might, or you might, conclude something different about this. But this is what he's doing. This is his life. What we're seeing with this Sun Ceres, with a 1 minute orb, here's his chart. His is a 2 minute orb, Sun conjunct Ceres, 2 minute orb. These people have Sun conjunct Ceres, 1 and 2 minute orbs. It's pervading their lives. This also gives me the idea that any major object out there that's conjunct your Sun with a 1 or 2 minute orb, there's a good chance it's pervading your life. And I think the idea of pervading, like it sets a tone, it sets an awareness, it sets a priority that this is infused into everything you're doing. Very amazing to me, just mind-boggling, how every time we do this research with a different emphasis, a different set of rules, here it's Sun conjunct Ceres, it's so clear. It's so... Very often research is just not this clear and straightforward. So, conclusion, our study confirms earlier findings that Ceres brings a Jupiterian large view of personal matters. That's a nice, simple way to summarize it. The personal matters are often related to marriage or food. That's what we've seen come up very often. Marriage and food. So, I think that's my last slide. Oh, yeah. I've got one more. This is the last. Yeah, this is the last one. Amazingly, not only is the goddess Ceres associated with agriculture, right? Ceres, cereal is a food that's developed through agriculture. that food that we associate with Ceres, cereal, I mean, it's just kind of an amazing coincidence, requires a social system. So if you're going to grow cereal, it's usually on a large land, and typically some machinery is needed, or a big team, doesn't necessarily need to have tractors or whatever, but it's a large operation requiring a social network to do it. I mean, I can grow cabbage and carrots in my garden, and a lot of us do. And so we have little gardens, we go out, we have herbs and whatever, and we go, we pick them. We can do that in our own little personal space. I can do it by myself. Nobody has to know about it. Often it is a very personal fulfillment to do something like that. But cereal, that's a larger scale collective operation. That's an interesting coincidence, isn't it? That Ceres, so connected with the word cereal, is a way of creating food through a collective process by bringing Jupiter in, by bringing the larger context, and that people work together. And usually you produce so much of the cereal, it wouldn't just be for yourself. If I'm growing tomatoes, I might grow enough for myself. Maybe I give some away to my neighbor or something. Relatively small scale personal thing. But this agricultural level is something that's done with the assumption that not everybody's going to grow all their needed food. Some people are going to be producers, distribute it, etc. Collective effort to meet personal needs. So in every case, the people with Sun conjunct Ceres with a small orb are writing about, talking about, prioritizing the importance of the social context, in some cases you might say higher purpose, a moral purpose or a social purpose, social context that pervades our personal experiences, and how that social context is necessary. I think that's the point I really want to make here. That if you leave out Jupiter and Saturn and everything else, and you just think, oh, marriage, I'm in love with her, oh, food, I'm hungry, this is nutritious and fine, and just thinking about your little world, you're missing something. That's what Ceres says, is you're missing, whoa, that's fine. That does it, but it's not enough. It's not enough. You need to also consider how this fits into your whole community, your whole country, the whole world. How does this fit into life? And every one of these people are addressing those issues. How do our laws, our regulations, our guidelines, how do they interface with the personal needs of people? And do they uplift? Do they help? Do they lead to strange and odd situations? Like the Quimpers who left, I think it was New Jersey, for Columbiana, and all of the things they encounter in that social context of what is allowed, what is supported, what laws are in place, what laws may be in place that people have forgotten about, etc. Okay. Well, there it is, Ceres. That's what it's about. Not always completely nice and sweet, but it has a very vitally important part of our lives. Okay, so more evidence for Ceres. This just confirms what I presented in the previous 3 videos. Shows some more examples, some more, you see it in different context and get a better intuitive feeling, but no real change from the continued research on Ceres. Always seems to be confirming very clearly this is what Ceres is in astrology. Okay, thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.